Now, I covered number 1 to number 4 last week, and today we're going to move on to the interesting part, which is number 5 to number 8. Today, let's start with the cessation of identity. Now, because this is a way leading to the cessation of identity. One regards the I, forms, I consciousness, I contact, I feeling, I craving, thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. Here we know, right, that in order to have cessation of identity, we must see, understand, and realize non-self. The cessation of identity applies to all 6 sets of 6. But we have been living countless lives with the perception of mind, I, and self, so much so that it has become ingrained in us. To let go of mind, I, and self is not easy at all, this ego. Anatta is a very difficult concept to understand on an intellectual level, let alone realize it. And the Buddha knew that. During the Buddha's time, a lot of people who approached him wanted direct answers to questions like, what am I? Do I have a self? Do I not exist? Do I exist? Right? The Buddha always offered the 4 Noble Truths as an alternative way of experiencing the truth. Instead, then, viewing truth in relation to self, he said that it should be viewed in terms of dukkha, how it should be understood, how to abandon the cause of suffering, how to realize cessation of suffering, and how to develop the path to its cessation. This forms the framework within which the not-self doctrine is best understood and realized. It is the same for the Chachakka Sutta. It lists down 6 sets of 6, demonstrates how they do not fit in for the criteria for self, then shows how, in spite of that, we still have this sense of mind, I, and self. Up to this point, the Sutta has merely shown that the 6 sets of 6 are the culprits that lead to self-identification, when this is just a form connecting you to the outside world. In section 5, we see that because there is no abiding self in the 6 sets of 6, cessation of self is possible, which means cessation of suffering is possible. In section 6 and 7, we will see how these self-identification gives rise to craving, which in turn causes suffering, and then we see how we can end it. So we move on to look at underlying tendencies. An underlying or latent tendency is one that is present even if it is not outwardly displayed or expressed in any way. Because dependent on I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the 3 is eye contact. With eye contact as condition, there arises an I feeling, felt as pleasant or painful, or neither pleasant or painful. You can't stop, right, this I feeling from happening. Once contact is formed, feeling arises, whether pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral, right? So it can refer to physical sensations. For example, 舒服吗? Is it comfortable or not comfortable? Hot or cold? It can refer to emotions, right? Like sadness, anger, excitement, and confusion. Our experiences in daily life cover a whole range of feelings. In one sutta, the Buddha mentioned a total of 108 kinds of feelings. But everything we can feel can be narrowed down to 3 basic feeling tones, right? Pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And what is the relationship between these 3 kinds of feelings and the underlying tendencies? When one is touched by a pleasant eye feeling, if one delights in it, welcomes it, and remains holding to it, then the underlying tendency to lust lies within one. When one is touched by a painful eye feeling, if one sorrows, grieves and laments, weeps, beating one's breast and becomes distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion lies within one. Sok.
When one is touched by neither pleasant nor painful eye feeling, if one does not understand as it actually is the origination, the disappearance, the gratification, the danger, and the escape. In regard to that eye feeling, then the underlying tendency to ignorance lies within one.
These two sentences describe eye craving. The first sentence describes craving for sense pleasures and craving for being. Craving for being means I want to become someone. I want to go somewhere. I want to achieve something. I want. It refers basically to craving for life situations that will give us pleasant feelings. Now, this sentence is about craving for non-being. This craving arises when we want pleasant experience, but we can't get it, or when we resist unpleasant experiences. These three types of craving makes up the second noble truth, and they cover all types of craving through the 6 sense bases. What we have to remember is this: pleasant feelings act as cause and condition for craving that is supported and stimulated into action by the underlying tendency of lust. Unpleasant feelings act as a cause and condition for craving that is driven by the underlying tendency of aversion. Okay, so this is revision. And the Buddha says that neutral feelings condition ignorance. Last, aversion and ignorance is the same as greed, hatred, and delusion. The next question: why is neutral feeling linked with ignorance? Many people get very confused when they read this part. To understand this, we have to look at these 3 sentences from a different perspective. The Buddha said that in response to pleasant feelings, we have lust. In response to painful feelings, we have aversion. Ignorance is also present as long as we have not realized the 4 noble truths, right? Because in response to neutral feelings, which means no lust and no aversion, we only have ignorance if we do not appreciate neutral feelings. Without lust and aversion, which agitates and clouds the mind, neutral feelings can actually help to settle down into equanimity. An equanimous mind is calm, peaceful, balanced, detached, non-reactive, a mind that is ready to see Dharma. So when we all come for class and we practice mental cultivation, we are cultivating the mind to appreciate the here and now, neutral feelings, no judgment. So neutral feelings can therefore act as a doorway through which can see, understand, and realize the true nature of things. This statement therefore means that if we do not make use of neutral feelings to understand things as they are, neutral feelings will continue to condition ignorance and hinder the development of wisdom. And this is usually the case, right? Neutral feelings are largely ignored because they are very subtle and difficult to recognize. And when we do recognize them, we consider them boring because they do not stimulate the senses, right? The 6 sense base. So that I feeling refers not just to neutral feelings, but also to the pleasant and painful ones, because ignorance or delusion underlies all three types of feelings. So now we know why neutral feeling is linked to ignorance. Let us move on. So the same thing is repeated for the other 5 sets of 6. And for each set, the Buddha tells us that it is impossible to end suffering if we do not abandon our lust, our aversion, and delusion that arise in response to our feelings. Why? Because these 3 underlying tendencies act as a fuel for craving. And as long as there is craving, there is dukkha, suffering. Do you see the importance of feeling in the whole process? Our world revolves around feeling, doesn't it? Always chasing after pleasant feelings, avoiding or resisting unpleasant ones, and even neutral ones, because they do not stimulate our senses. That is how we live our life. We respond to feelings in a way because we do not know any other way. So people who get caught up in feelings always suffer a lot. Next, the abandonment of the underlying tendencies. Here we will find another way, a better way to respond to our feelings. This section will serve as a revision for many of you. Because dependent on I and forms, I consciousness arises. I'm not going to read. I think by now you should all be very familiar, right? Okay, memorize if you can. Okay, what gives rise to contact and how feeling arises, and the lastly, craving. When one is touched by a pleasant I feeling, if one does not delight in it, welcome it, and remains holding to it, then the underlying tendency to lust does not lie within us. Okay? When one is touched by painful I feeling, if one does not sorrow, grieve, and lament, does not weep, beating one's breast and becomes distraught, then the underlying tendency to aversion does not lie within one. Okay, and this one, you read this on your own. Now you can understand. This is repeated for the other 5 sets of 6. So what is the Buddha telling us to do? He tells us to abandon the 3 underlying tendencies. There's no craving law, there's no suffering. So how do we do that? To find the answer here, so this is what we will focus on, all right? Our practice is to understand it as it really is, these 5 factors. In regard to all these 6 classes of feelings, in order to abandon not just ignorance, but also lust and aversion. The Buddha did not elaborate on these 5 factors, so we will refer to another sutta. Sok.
With the arising of contact, there is the arising of feeling. Craving is the way leading to the origination of feeling. With the cessation of contact, there is the cessation of feeling. The Noble Eightfold Path is the way leading to the cessation of feeling. That is right view, right concentration. The pleasure and joy that arise in dependence on feeling. This is the gratification of feeling. That feeling is impermanent, suffering, and subject to change. This is the danger in feeling. The removal and abandonment of desire and lust for feeling. This is the escape from feeling.
I am not sure whether you all noticed this, but the 4 noble truths are actually shown here, right? Not in terms of dukkha, But in terms of feelings, we have the first noble truth of feeling, then the second noble truth of the cause of feeling, the third noble truth of cessation of feeling, and the fourth noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of feeling. Why feeling? Think about it, right? In what way do we experience suffering? As feeling, right? Bhante Ji, his full name is Bhante Gunaratana, once said that the entire teaching of the Buddha is based on feeling, because this is how we experience suffering. The feeling we see here, therefore, refers to the feeling of suffering, the way we experience suffering. This is the Four Noble Truths, all right, seen from the perspective of feeling. Then gratification, danger, and escape. Explain the practice in more detail. First, gratification. I'm sure all of us agree that that our lives are largely dependent on sense gratification. Why do we seek out the best restaurants to eat? Even though, why do we eat unhealthy food when we know that it is not good for the body? Why do we spend money to travel far and wide just for the excitement? Why do we even marry and have children? Okay. We keep running after sense objects through our six sense spaces simply because we want to keep experiencing pleasant sensations. And when we experience unpleasant sensations and even neutral ones, what do? We try our very best to replace them with pleasant experiences. To understand gratification of feeling as it actually is, we have to observe all these habitual tendencies for ourselves. Okay? For example, a thought of coffee arises. This cup of coffee is the mind object, right? By the time we pay attention to it, there is already the meeting of the mind door, mind object, and mind consciousness, giving us what? Contact. And then when we think about the coffee, we feel good, don't we? All right. Those who like coffee will definitely feel good because caffeine increases the level of dopamine in the brain. And that is the chemical that makes us very happy. Note that pleasant feeling and watch how it conditions craving. See how often the thought of coffee keeps popping up in the mind and how it causes the chain of events from mind contact to mind craving. And if you do Vipassana this way, let me know your craving will just be halved. Because you're looking at this whole process clinically. You don't own it as I, mind, and self. Note when we eventually get into our craving and act on it, note the pleasure and joy that comes with it. Gratification of feelings, therefore, means satisfying our craving for pleasant feelings by indulging or giving into our desire for something or someone. Understanding gratification of feeling as it actually is, therefore, means understanding through what? Direct experience. How feeling forms that important link, right, between contact and the nature of the reaction that follows. Also understanding the power of craving itself and how our desire for gratification directs our intentions in daily life. How do we understand the danger in feeling? In particular, pleasant feelings, as it actually is. We have to investigate it, observe it. We see for ourselves how sense pleasures continually change and disappear. We try to solve this problem by going after another pleasant experience and another, but the happiness we get never lasts. So for example, after you drink your cup of coffee, how long did you stay satisfied? When we keep observing this way, we see the impermanence of sense pleasures, and because of their impermanence, we see how unsatisfactory they are by nature. And because it is not within our control to make our pleasant feelings last, how can we see it as self? In this way, we slowly reduce our craving for sense pleasures. Our practice is not about rejecting sense pleasure. Our objective is to understand them so well that we will not be deluded by them anymore. Basically, you want to drink coffee now, you have it, good. But if you don't, no coffee machine around, you run out of coffee, never mind. No attachment, no dukkha, no suffering, right? Because we are able to practice this way, it is therefore possible to make an end of suffering by abandoning the underlying tendencies to lust, aversion, and ignorance in regard to feeling. Okay. One last question. Why did the Buddha choose only these 6 factors? Internal sense base, external sense base, sense consciousness, sense contact, sense feeling, and sense craving. This familiar? The dependent origination. When compared to the 12 links in dependent origination, you will see that the 6 sets of 6 cover only 4 links. We understand now why the Sutta started with the 6 sense bases. All right? Why? Because we get a whole world of experience through the 6 sense faculties. But why does the line of causation end at craving? Why not at clinging or death? To answer this question, we look at what the Buddha says about karma. So,
And what because is all karma? The I is all karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. The ear is all karma. The mind is all karma, to be seen as generated and fashioned by volition, as something to be felt. This is called all karma.
all karma refers to the result of karma. Okay, this body with the 5 sense faculties of sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch is produced by the karmic activities of past existences. And because this body is a result of karma, vipaka, right, or old karma, our bodily experiences are passive and are outside our control. Okay, let me explain this further. Take the eye door process, for example. As long as our eye faculty is functional and there are visible forms that the eyes can pick up, eye consciousness will arise, right? Whether we want it or not. This process depends on the eye and form as cause and condition and is outside our control. Similarly for eye contact and eye feeling. Now, the Buddha went on to say this. So,
and what because is new karma. Whatever action one does now by body, speech, or mind, this is called new karma.
So this means the whole eye door process, up to feeling, is something we cannot control. But what follows is not passive. Craving is the first step where we respond actively and cause karma, right? For example, seeing a car is all karma, a passive experience. It is a pleasant experience because you like sports car. This is still a passive response. But wanting to get a car like that one thing, or having the intention to steal one, is an active process which can set into motion mental, verbal, and physical actions that create new karma. This is why the Buddha stopped at sense craving in this sutta. At this stage, we can start controlling what we do. We can decide to roll along with our habitual impulses, either chasing after these or rejecting sense experiences, or we can decide to manage the craving by letting it be. All right, so let's talk about liberation, the last. So,
Saying thus, bhikkhus, the well-taught noble disciple becomes disenchanted with the eye, disenchanted with forms, disenchanted with eye consciousness, disenchanted with eye contact, disenchanted with eye feeling, disenchanted with eye craving.
here, what is the Buddha talking about? He was talking about nibbida or disenchantment, right? Other terms used for nibbida are disgust and weariness. It means you can see sense pleasures for what they are, so that you will no longer be deluded by them. You're very sian now, you know. Ajahn Chah calls it the mental sobering up of the mind. I personally think this description by Ajahn Chah is actually the best description for nibbida, because the Buddha often referred to our indulgence in sense pleasures as intoxication of the mind. So we need to sober up the mind. When the mind sobers up and you are no longer deluded by sense pleasures, the mind automatically turns away from them. You don't have that passion to chase for it. No more attachment. No attachment means no more dukkha, no more suffering. Total cessation is nibbana. In the suttas, you can often find three terms mentioned. The Pali terms being nibbada, viraga, and nirodha, always in this order. This is what the Blessed One said. The bhikkhus were satisfied and delighted in the Blessed One's words. Now, while this discourse was being spoken, through not clinging, the minds of 60 bhikkhus were liberated from the taints. Wow, they got their fruition, they got enlightened. Okay, remember the bhikkhus were in samadhi, so they were actually doing vipassana, actually understood and realized the Dhamma. Is this familiar? This is the Buddha Dhamma, okay? We have covered quite a lot here, but you can see the whole Buddha Dhamma is presented here. The Chachakka Sutta encompasses all the core teachings of the Buddha, as seen from the perspective of the six sense bases. In essence, the Sutta teaches us how we can contemplate the factors of sense experience in order to manage our craving, so we can eventually uproot the underlying tendencies of greed, hatred, and delusion to realize not self. If you're a beginner in the practice, what should you apply with regard to the teachings given in the sutta? There are two areas of practice you can try. First, you can contemplate, right, the 6 sets of 6 as part of samatha practice first. Samatha first, just to still the mind. This not only helps to quiet down the mind, but you familiarize yourself with the chain of events. All right, you memorize these 6 sets of 6, how it comes about. Number 2, when you know the 6 sets of 6 very well, it will become very natural, right, to fall back on this theme when you examine your feelings and the actions that follow in daily life. Do you remember the coffee example? You can watch how pleasant, unpleasant, and even neutral feelings condition your actions. Start with the physical sensations. See how they condition craving. You can also observe very strong mental feelings and craving. For example, if you love shopping, observe how news of new arrivals or big sales condition feeling, which in turn condition craving. When you become more sensitive to your mind, you can contemplate the more subtle feelings and cravings. And if your mind is very, very quiet and you have gone into samadhi before and your mind is quiet, and when you crave for something, you can see how heavy the mind turns. And even for me, I say the taste a bit bitter. So this is what the Chachakka Sutta is all about, right? When you really understand what the Buddha teaches in this sutta, you can see that everything is about practice. And when you practice what the Buddha taught, you will slowly begin to understand why the Dhamma is good in the beginning, good in the middle, and good at the end. Okay, so this is the end of my sharing.